All right, so we're finishing up chondrichthyans. So we're going to go through kind of their characteristics and then go over some species. And I chose this group to kind of go into a little more depth as far as the number of, the number of groups and giving you more specific names. It chose chondrichthyans because there's a lot less species of chondrichthyans than there are of bony fish. So, I'll give you some examples of bony fish, but they'll be larger groups. So we're going to go down to the order within at least the elasmobranchs. So this is the classification of the modern or living chondrichthyans. Again, there are lots of fossils. But we got our subphylum here, our superphylum Chordata, phylum Craniata, subphylum Vertebrata, and then here's our infraphylum Gnathostomata, and then class Chondrichthyes, which again means cartilaginous fish. And then we have the elasmobranchs and the holocephalians or holocephalii. So we got sharks and rays belong to the elasmobranchs, and which means thin slits or thin gill slits is what the name means. And then holocephalans means complete or fused head, referring to the more robust attachment of their lower jaw to the cranial case. And they're called spook and ghost fish. I'll show you some pictures of those. They are considered sister taxon, even though there's some argument over their phylogenetic positioning. So, as you can imagine, most of the skeleton is cartilaginous, right? Because they're called cartilaginous fish. They don't have any true bone tissue, what we would call true bone tissue. They do have some bony remnants or calcified connective tissue in their scales and their teeth. They also have calcium support throughout their body. It's like laying down calcium crystals within the cartilage to give it a more robust or more stout support to their large size. And you particularly see these tesserae in the jaws. All right, so the jaw of a shark is a lot more structured. It's stronger. It looks more like bone. It's because it's got a lot of calcium associated with it. But it's not true bone because it's not organized right and it doesn't have vascularization. Now, the reason they're cartilaginous is because cartilage is light. All right, it's much lighter. So they can be much larger, strong, but light. And so the largest fish in the ocean is the whale shark. All right, so it's a huge animal, and they have very little fat, so their body's dense. If they were bone, they would just sink to the bottom. They'd be like a submarine. They would sink to the bottom. So the cartilage really lightens their skeleton, and they don't have a buoyancy device, or a buoyancy organ might be a better word, like bony fish do, which have actually bony skeletons like we do. So they rely on their skeleton to lighten their load, their heterocircular tail to help them maintain depth, and a lot of sharks, particularly pelagic sharks, pelagic means open water sharks, they have to swim 24 hours a day. All right, and so they sleep on the move, because if they do stop, they're just going to sink. Right? They're still more dense than water. The other thing that you're going to really notice when you do your dissection of the sharks, and the reason sharks smell so bad once you start a dissection, is their livers. Their livers are absolutely humongous. When you go in, they're going to have huge. You're going to open up the body cavity of a shark, and it's going to be all liver. You're going to throw the liver out of the way, and it's going to be really oily, the inside of the shark. And the reason for that is because they produce these oils, which are more buoyant, which again help them maintain some sense or ease in maintaining their depth. We also have paired fins, right? So you got paired fins now are going to be a common feature of all sharks and all bony fish. Now there are some fish that lose some of the fins. They could lose their pelvic fins, they could lose one of their dorsal fins, but those aren't paired fins. The paired fins are the pelvic fins and the pectoral fins, which are going to be hooked to the vertebrae with a bar that goes across, of cartilage that goes across and kind of acts like their pelvis, if you will. And you can see in the picture here, here's the bar I mentioned. Here's a bar right here. It's called the ischiopubic bar, or pubio bar, even though they don't have a true ischium or pubic bone like the tetrapods do. These are the pelvic fins, and this is a male because this is the cartilage skeleton components of what's called a clasper, which is what the males use to deliver sperm to the female reproductive tract. Obviously, most of their skeleton is in their skull and in their fins and their backbone, right? So they have a backbone that has actually cartilaginous vertebrae, right? And we'll look at that next, which is on this next slide. And so they do still have a very prominent notochord. So this is kind of a closer image, zoomed in on just the vertebral column here of a typical shark. And so again, all these pictures come from the dogfish because it's a very common shark. It's one of the most common sharks in the ocean. They hunt in packs of over 1,000 sharks at a time, and so they're often caught in trawling nets and then are sold to biological science warehouses so that they can fix them and send them for dissection, right? And so, a lot of what you see on their anatomy and their internal organs are on dogfish, or these what we call a small cold water shark. And they, if you look at their vertebral column, this is what the typical vertebrae looks like, close to the head. And this is what the vertebra looks like further towards the tail. You can see that you start to get wings here in the modern sharks that come off of here. It's called the basopophis here, which is basically like or analogous, now not homologous, but analogous to transverse processes in our vertebrae. They increase surface area to attach muscles, right? And so as the muscles get larger and stronger as you move towards the tail, because this is what's going to move the tail, right? The body wall muscles. But when you look at the typical vertebrae, each one, whether it's caudally located or cranially located, has a large flat head that's called, or I say a large flat body, that's called the centrum, which means center or body. And running through the middle of the centrum or body is the notochord. You can still see it. So the notochord is not completely replaced. It's just surrounded, if you will, with cartilage. And you're going to have either one major dorsal arch, right? And this can be called the neural spine, or it can be called the neural plate if it's flat on top. And all of these line up really nicely like a stack of coins, so that all of the arches here, the spinal arch or the neural arch, all line up so that you form a spinal canal, which will house and surround the dorsal nerve cord to protect it, right, inside of cartilage. As you move cranially, you might have a couple arches on the bottom also, which are hemoarches or hemoforamina. I've even seen them called foramina or a foramen. These arches will hold the caudal artery and the caudal veins, which are the arteries and veins that travel to the tail. Now, if you look here, we're kind of closer towards the head region. This is in sagittal section, and so up here is the neural spine, and down here is the hemal plate or hemal spine. And on a test, you could use either, right? Plate or spine, or on a lab practical. I don't care which one you use. But here are the hemal arches here, which hold the blood vessels. Here is the neural archer canal that holds the spinal cord as it runs through it. And so this is going to be typical of what we see. As we move into bony fish, you're going to replace the cartilage with the actual bone, but a lot of the bony fish still have really long remnants of the notochord that run through the body of the vertebrae. So this up here is called a guitar fish. It's kind of a half shark, half ray. But it's also a chondrichthyon. Now, some really cool, very derived specializations of the modern sharks. Most sharks see pretty well, but you know that they live in murky water often, especially if the water's churned up and they can't see. So they have a number of other kind of sensory structures that allow them to sense what's going on around them when visibility is bad. And so the one thing that sharks can do, which is absolutely phenomenal, is they can detect electrical currents, all right, or electricity. And you might be like, well, why is that? Why would they be able to do that? That's because all of your muscle and nerve communication is electrical, right? You produce electricity. You produce a lot of electricity. You've seen it measured before, right? Like if you ever had an EKG, or have you seen an EKG done? That's the measure of electrical activity of your entire heart. Sharks can sense your heartbeat. They can sense it in the water. They can feel the electricity, right? They can sense the electricity. There could be a fish resting under the sand and they could know it's there because they could hear its heartbeat through these receptors. These are called the ampullae of Lorenzini, and they're really concentrated on the snout, the underneath surface of the snout of a shark. And so this is the ventral surface of the shark snout, or the head. This is what they call the rostrum, or snout. And you can see it's kind of glittery, like the snow outside when you shine light on it. Those are the scales. Those are called placoid scales. But if you go down here and you look ventrally, you'll find two nostrils on either side, but then you'll start to see holes, right? These larger, darker pores. All right, those are the openings to these ampullae of Lorenzini, which are the electrical sensing organs, if you will, of the shark. And I actually went out and found a paper a couple days ago. I had a hard time finding really good images of it. I found a drawing a long time ago. All right, and so this is the opening. You're looking down into that opening, and it's a canal that runs down under the skin that is going to swell here like a cherry or grape on a stem, and is going to be lined with what are called support cells and receptor cells. And these cells, the support cells, they produce a gel that is very electrogenic. It has the ability to increase the sensitivity of electrical currents. And so it's going to be a really good conductor, this gel, of electrical currents that it could pick up from the water. So any muscle contraction or any heartbeats or anything that's giving off electricity can be picked up by these ampullae. And the receptor cells pick up the electrical current and convert it into a nerve impulse that will be transferred to a sensory nerve. That's what this represents here, is a sensory nerve that wraps its dendrites around the receptor cells. So do you guys all know the basic anatomy of a nerve? Just so that that makes sense to you. Most nerves have basically a cell body where the nucleus is found, and then a really long process that's called the axon. Okay? And the axon is like a wire. It's what conducts electricity far away from the nerve. On the other side of the nerve, and I'll turn on the light so you can see it a little better. So that's the axon. This is the cell body. On the other side of the nerve, you have one or more smaller processes that are called dendrites. All right, and so dendrites are the receiving end of a nerve. They're like antennae. They can pick up something, right? In this instance, they're associated with the receptor cells there. And the receptor cells will transfer the electrical current they're picking up to the nerve cell. And so if your heart's beating, every beat gives off an electrical stimulus, and they can hear that. They sense it. They don't have to see you. They don't have to know that you're there. They just know that there's electricity coming from that area. So you've probably heard of sharks going crazy and attacking boats, right? Especially swim platforms. They like to bite it onto, and the reason they do that is because swim platforms are metal, and when they hit water, they produce static electricity. So if a shark's like worked up because there's food in the water, you speared a fish, they feel electricity, like wham, they hit it because they don't have hands, so they test with their mouths. That just, being sharks. They're not crazy sharks. So in any case, that's why they attack things like that. So, and these nerves, these sensory nerves, will then send that information back to the brain, and it allows them to sense hidden prey, which is really cool, right? All sharks have these. Most chondrichthyans have these. And you guys seen hammerheads, right? The hammerhead is one of my favorite sharks. One thing I really, really want to do, and my daughter wants to do, and my wife thinks we're crazy, is go to Bimini and this time of year, and the great hammerheads are breeding there. And so you could get in shallow water with a 8 to 10 foot hammerhead, right? And so they have it's got the spoil across. The whole underside of that is ampullae. And so when you watch they love stingrays. That's what they eat. And what do stingrays do in the sand? Bury themselves. So when you see a hammerhead, you can look up videos, them hunting, they're doing this along the sand surface because they're trying to pick up the heartbeats of stingrays. So that's how they find their prey. It's pretty cool. Now, when you get to your lab and you start dissecting your shark, I'll have you guys find these. And if you take the snout of your shark and you pull it back real hard, the gel will pop out of the it'll leak out of the pores. You'll be able to see it. And then if you skin this area, and these are found in other places around the head, but if you skin that area and pull the skin back, you'll be able to find the little swollen base here, or glandular portion, and then you'll see the long canals of the ampullae. You'll be able to find those typically when you pull them back. And this is what they look like under a microscope. This is a nice one here. This is the surface of the skin. Here's the opening of the pore, and here is the gel in the canal, and these are all the receptor and support cells down here. And then this is the nervous portion right here. They've stained blue the neurofilaments, or the intermediate filaments of the cytoskeleton of the nerve, and these are the dendrites that are coming in and wrapping around the base of this particular sensory structure. It's one of my favorite structures. Now, you want to know an animal that has these also? That it's an example of really nice convergence. Have you ever heard of platypus? Right? Phineas and Ferb, right? And the platypus. The platypus bill, which looks like a duck, is full of structures that look just like this. And if you've ever looked at a platypus, they have really little eyes. And if you watch them hunt, a platypus will jump into the water, close its eyes, and do this. With its bill, it's hunting for electrical currents. So they hunt the same way. It's kind of cool. That's an example of convergence, though, right? Because that's a mammal, not a shark. All right, so that's the ampullae. The next thing I like to talk about are the scales, because all of our fish have dermal scales. When I say that, that means their scales come from their dermis, right? And this is going to be kind of what I like to at least call the climax of dermal bone evolution, right? And so, those ostracoderms had those huge plates. Placoderms had more flexible plates. And that evolution continues in the rest of the fishes we're going to look at as what we call dermal scales. And so we're going to reduce the bone down and shape them to fit fish's shape and its niche-specific needs as far as the environment goes. Now, what's really interesting about sharks is their scales look exactly like their teeth. So they actually have teeth in their skin. The scale is hard, it's covered in enamel, and they're just miniature versions of their teeth. And so if you section a shark tooth, it looks just like the scale that you guys saw in your slides. It's just a much bigger version of it. A matter of fact, the tooth epithelium is found right inside of the jaw, and gives rise to the same cells, which are called odontoblasts, the same way it does in the scales that are found all over its body. Now, the one thing, if you've never touched a shark, if you run your hand down a shark the right way, it feels like sandpaper. And the reason for that is because you probably saw this on your slides. Most sharks, or at least most of the sharks that we're going to come in contact with, their scales actually penetrate or past their epidermis, and basically make the skin really tough and kind of sandpaperish. And for a long time, biologists thought, oh, just, you watch sharks, they beat each other up when they're fighting for food, they run into boats. It's like very protective, right? The skin, it makes the skin more robust. In reality, what it does is it actually breaks up surface tension in the water. Water literally does not touch their body or make contact with their body because their teeth literally bite through or break contact through water. They're actually knifing their way using all of the little scales on the surface of their body to prevent any drag in the water. And if you ever get to swim with sharks, it's pretty incredible. They can move so effortlessly through the water. And what they did is they put some small sharks, some ground sharks, in a swim tank, and they produce current and make the shark swim. And then they add dye to the water, and you can see the dye when it hits the shark, it just doesn't make contact with the surface of the body because these scales are breaking the surface tension. It's really, really awesome. So they're kind of knifing their way through. It's like a perfect evolutionary marvel as far as the way they move through water. Now, when you look at the scales, they look like kind of a rounded triangle in many cases. I want you to realize, though, that these scales can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes on sharks. And even in different parts of the body, depending on the specialization the shark has, where it lives, the scales can look very different. Most pelagic sharks that live in open water, have these types of scales all over their body because they're swimming all the time. It just makes swimming much more effective. But all scales are kind of built the same way. If you blow up one of these scales, they arise from the dermis. All right, remember the skin has two layers. The layer on top that's in contact with, if you remember this from your lab, it's in contact with the water or the air or the environment. It's called the epidermis, right? The epidermis. And then the dermis is the deep layer, the connective tissue layer, which can be really thick or really thin. And it has blood vessels and nerves and glues the epidermis to the underlying tissue. The dermis also gives rise to dermal bone, right? Like osteoderm. And it also gives rise to all scales in fish, right? Which are dermal derivatives. That's important. The dermis comes from mesoderm, right? That embryonic germ layer. When we get to like reptiles, and we start talking about scales and reptiles, and birds have scales on their legs, those are epidermal derivatives. They come from the skin. Feathers come from the skin, from the actual epidermis, from the epithelium of the skin, not the dermis. So these are actually arise from specializations in the dermis. And when you blow up one of these guys here, here's the scale, an individual scale under really high power. And these are the epidermal cells, right? A group of them right here between these two scales, another group of them. So these are epithelial cells. And then the base of the scale is embedded in the collagen upper layer of the dermis. And what you'll see is the scale's hollow. All right, it has a pulp cavity, and it's got this hollow area. And the teeth in here are called odontoblast, which means tooth builder. I mean, that's what the actual word, odonto means teeth, blast means to build or builder. And so it is a tooth building group of cells. And these cells produced the scale, all right? And then they maintain the scale. And so they're found in a cavity, and then they send really long processes up into the underlying flexible, more living tissue that's called dentin. you're going to see that all teeth are made up of this underlying living kind of almost bony-like tissue called dentin. And then there is a non-living, inorganic, very solid layer on the top of every tooth called enamel, which I know you all have heard of, right? Enamel is the hardest substance in a vertebrate's body. And its job is crushing and wear and all of that, right? And so this is basically a tooth in the skin. And if you looked at the teeth of a tooth of a shark, it'll look a lot like this. As a matter of fact, I'll pass out a scale here in a minute. I'll pass out a tooth in a minute that looks just like this scale on a much larger, scale, or a much larger growth scale, if you will. So those are the placoid scales. So that leads us to talk about teeth, right? The coolest thing about sharks is their serial teeth replacers. They shed their teeth continuously. And all sharks do. I used to have a shark jaw. I don't, that I could pass around so you could see where the tooth membrane was. The tooth membrane, if you were to be able to put your hand in a shark mouth, which I never recommend, and you go all the way down and touch where the jaw meets the floor of the mouth, you'll feel a roughened edge. That is the tooth membrane, and you'll actually feel teeth embedded in it as they're produced. They are then released, and they're basically on a conveyor belt like this. So this is the inside of the jaw. Here's the tooth that is coming up, and then there are usually anywhere from 3 to 7 rows of teeth behind that. And so when they bite into something, they'll leave teeth behind, or the tooth will fall out, and then the one below it will come up and replace it. And they can replace their teeth about a tooth every 7 to 12 days. They're producing new teeth and pushing the old ones up. And so they shed them continually. And so this is why shark teeth are so sharp, right? Because once they're old, they just shed them. So to give you an idea, a mature tiger shark will go through about 24,000 teeth in its adult lifetime. So it's shedding teeth all the time. This is why prehistoric shark teeth are really common if you look for them in certain parts of the world. They're all over the place. Megalodon teeth are also pretty common if you know where to go to hunt for them. So the other cool thing about shark's teeth, and I'll just pass them out, is that the size of the shark tooth, and I have a couple teeth here. I used to collect them when I dove at the Newport Aquarium. I would dive in the shark tank, and we would collect teeth as we ran around cleaning the tank. I have a bunch of different teeth in here. So the tooth I'm going to pass out is from a sand tiger, which is also called a snaggletooth shark, if I can get him out. I gave most of them away a long time ago, but I do have a nice size one here. So this is one of the smaller teeth of about a 6-foot shark, right? So good, shark's pretty good size. There's a male. And it looks a lot like the scale. I'll pack and pass that around and let you guys. Now the cool thing about teeth is they show really great allometry, which means that if you measure a tooth, you can basically guess the size of the shark. So that's a 6-foot shark. This is a megalodon tooth. So it's actually a real megalodon tooth. So this is a fossil. Cool thing about this tooth. This tooth was found in a field in Ohio. A farmer found it and then gave it to somebody at Wittenberg who was one of my mentors, and he gave it to me when he retired. So megalodons weren't found in Ohio, but the native Indians in the Ohio Valley used to trade them. So how cool is that? But what I want you to do is look at the fossil, and you can still feel the serrated edges here. So if that shark's 6 feet, this is one of the smaller teeth in a megalodon's mouth, you're talking 50 feet, right? It's a big shark. So megalodons aren't around anymore. I don't care what anybody says. They hunted whales. So they were whale eaters. And they needed a shallower ocean and more whales. So anyway, cool tooth, but it gives you an idea that, that was a big shark. Okay, reproduction. So sharks have incredible life history strategies. Sharks have been around a long time, and so they have a number of different ways to make sure that they pass their genes on to the next generation. And we're going to talk about kind of how they do this. The first and foremost, sharks rely on internal fertilization just like we do, which is really evolutionarily sound. Because if you're living in the ocean and you're just dumping your sperm and eggs into the water column, I mean, the likelihood of them meeting is pretty slim, right? So if a male can deliver sperm or his genome to the female reproductive tract directly, then the sperm can swim to the eggs. And so in order to do that, males have to have what's called an intromittent organ, or an organ to deliver the sperm to the female reproductive tract. And this image is a pretty cool image here. So this is an image, and you can't see it really well because the photographer took the picture with a flash, but there are divers all around the sharks here. And they're breeding at night in this instance. And when they do breed, sharks go into almost an aphrodisiac coma. They're like owls as they reproduce. They stop swimming, and the male and female are laying against the reef. And this is the female right here on this side, and here's the male on the left side. And these two structures here are called claspers. And what's so cool about this image is that this clasper is obviously extended right into the female reproductive tract, or it's a common tract. This is the opening to the cloaca. All right, the cloaca is the chamber that receives the digestive tract, the urinary tract, and the reproductive tracts in shark. The word cloaca actually translates as sewer. That's the name in Latin. And so this is the clasper is inserted there. And you see this little dark line? That is the clasper groove, or the dorsal groove. And you can see this is a dissection of a male where they've skinned the two claspers, and you can see the dorsal groove, and you can actually pull the groove apart. Now what the males do is they produce a really thick, it's not semen really, but a really thick extracellular fluid that's denser than salt water. And so that's what they allow their sperm to travel in. So it stays in the groove, it doesn't like wash away, you know what I mean? And so they sit like this for hours, and the male will leak sperm into the groove, and it goes into the female reproductive tract, where it then swims and fertilizes the eggs and the ovary. And we'll look at the male, and hopefully we get one male shark. I haven't looked. Male and female. Sometimes the females have babies in them, so the dogfish will dissect. Yep.
Why are great whites different? We think that they're the same way, but we haven't seen it. Why don't we see it?
Because they breed out in the middle of the ocean. And they've actually got a couple sites, at least in the Pacific Ocean, where they think the males and females go to breed. They just haven't been able to film it. And it's between California and Hawaii where they meet. But I mean, that's a lot of ocean, right, to find them. And they are tracking them. So you would think that eventually somebody's going to get video of it. Well, what happens is once they end up in that big area, then the females leave the males and end up off all the Hawaiian Islands. That's where they're seeing these huge females that are pregnant, right? Great whites, they are live birth. They give live birth. So we're going to talk about the differences in birth here in a second. So here's a live birth example right here. So look at the little baby shark was being born. There's an umbilicus here. Here's a baby shark sticking out of the bottom of a bull shark here, right? So they give birth in shallower water. They typically try to, at least, and many species do. So let's talk about the different types of reproductive strategies. So there are kind of three types of reproductive strategies in vertebrates. You can lay eggs. You can retain an egg in your female reproductive tract until it hatches, and then you give live birth. Or you can be placental, like we are, where we don't use a lot of yolk. We attach baby to mom, and baby's a parasite, right? And then we give live birth. So retaining the egg and giving birth is live birth, and obviously being placental is live birth. Laying eggs is not live birth. You lay the embryo in the egg and it develops in the eggs, right? Now, interestingly, typically vertebrates have one or maybe two of these strategies. Sharks have all three, right? Sharks and rays. I should say chondrichthyans. I keep saying sharks, but it's sharks, rays, and holocephalans. They all together show all three types of reproductive strategies. So let's go through these, and we'll again talk about them when we get to other groups. But oviparous or oviparity is organisms that lay eggs. So there are about somewhere anywhere from 30 to 40%, depending on who you read, chondrichthyans are egg bearing. And these guys are the ones that live in what we call coastal waters or live on the continental shelf. They live in shallow water. They have to have something to attach the eggs to. You can't be an egg layer and dump your egg in the middle of the ocean and it sinks to the bottom 5,000 feet, right? I mean, that would not be good for the baby. Yep.
What did you call them again? That lay eggs?
Oviparous, oviparity, yep. And the egg case is called a mermaid's purse because it looks like a little purse. It usually has a wide flat opening and then a little strap that they wrap around something, so they call them mermaid's purses. You can find these on beaches sometimes. We found them attached to reeds, and if you got to dig through reeds if you like doing this stuff. Most people don't because it smells, right? Saltwater stuff smells. But my kids have found them because they dig through everything, particularly my boys. But this is one from an aquarium where they've actually backlit the egg case so you can see the developing shark. And what I want you to notice is their eggs, when they lay an egg, is very yolk robust. All right, it's got copious amounts of yolk, a lot like, it looks like a chicken egg, doesn't it? A lot of yolk. And here's your little developing shark right here. All right, this is early on, and obviously as the baby grows, the yolk shrinks. They use the yolk for energy and to build, the shark tissue. And when they reach, maturity here, they then hatch, and the little baby shark comes out, right? These guys show no parental care. They lay their eggs and they leave. And so a lot of the sharks that you see in aquariums, the really small ground sharks, are egg-laying sharks. They're typically bamboo sharks, and I'll be honest with you, they breed like rabbits. So a lot of aquariums, and they had this trouble at the Newport Aquarium, and I know so much about the Newport Aquarium because I helped open that aquarium back in the 90s. I was one of their first scuba divers. And I was in grad school, so I just would spend my whole day there with the aquarist, who I became friends with. And then I would do all my research at night at the University of Cincinnati. So I got to do a lot of diving. They would throw me in tanks because I wasn't scared of anything. And I got to learn about all this stuff, as we went through it. So it was pretty cool. But they would have so many egg cases. I mean, they would get all these babies, and behind the scenes, there would just be aquariums of babies. And they finally had to just start, killing them, because there's just so many of them. But they would all put them on display so that you could, see them. So that was kind of cool. Each shark has a different egg case. Its morphology is different. So there are shark biologists can be like, oh, that's a swell shark. Oh, that's a bamboo shark. Oh, that because the case, I guess, is very species specific. So that's kind of neat. So when an embryo is laid, it can go anywhere from 6 to 9 months to 27 months. And it's all about how warm the water is, right? So a swell shark, for example, they live in very cold water. So, God, I hated getting in that tank. It was like 60 degrees. Freaking water was freezing, right? So it was very cold. And it would take, 24 months, 27 months for that egg case, embryo to develop, because these guys are ectotherms. They, develop really slowly in cold water. Whereas if it's a tropical bamboo shark, it's like, 6 months and you'll have little baby sharks. So hundreds of sharks do this. Most skates, so skates kind of look like a miniature ray. Skates have a smaller kind of flat head and then a longer tail, where a ray's all like flat, right? With a really long skinny tail. So most skates are egg layers. Only a few rays are. Most rays, most like we call stingrays or manta rays, most rays, the majority of them are live bearers, but there are a few that also lay eggs. Now, other sharks retain the egg, right? And so they still produce an egg, they release the egg, but it stays in the female reproductive tract and it develops inside a mom. All right. Now think about that. That's actually a really good strategy because mom's big and scary looking, right? You can imagine if you lay your egg on a reef, there might be some fish that eat it, right? If you retain the egg in mom and carry the egg around until it hatches, you've just protected the shark during the whole developmental period. But also, it's more practical in open water not to lay an egg, right? Or not to have to travel 100 miles towards the continental shelf in order to drop an egg in shallow water. So you can retain the babies and have birth out at sea, or maybe come in when it's birthing time and then produce babies. So most chondrichthyans are this type, which is called ovoviviparity, all right? So ovoviviparous are groups of sharks that retain their eggs. So your dogfish is this type of shark. It retains its eggs in the reproductive tract. So they have a uterus, right? Something labeled a uterus. Now, that's not like a female mammalian uterus, but it is the place where the eggs develop. So if you look at this is a nice picture here. They actually dissected out the reproductive tract here. This is the entire reproductive tract. So you have these two structures here that they pulled out that you can see there are different egg sizes here. These are eggs of different sizes. It might be hard to see, but there are some really little ones. And then there's some bigger ones. And then when they reach maturity, they're released into a long tube that's called the Mullerian duct, or the fallopian tube in mammals, or the uterine duct is another name you might see. And will travel to the swelling here, which will then empty into the cloaca and out the body. This swelling here is called the uterus. And in this particular shark, she was pregnant, if you will. Pregnant being that she had babies in the uterus that were at different stages of development here. And so these are called the uterine horns. They're usually a right and left one. And different sharks lay different numbers of eggs, right? So makos, whale sharks, I think whale sharks can produce again, whale shark's an open pelagic fish. They've never really seen them reproduce, right? But they think whale sharks can produce thousands of babies. Of course, most of them don't make it, right? As far as, when they make it. But there are a lot of sharks that do this. So great whites, whale sharks, sand tigers, makos, threshers, megamouth. There's a whole bunch of different sharks and rays that do this. So here's some very young embryos taken out of the uterus of a shark. This is the little baby shark, and this is the yolk. Here's a little further along, right? So you got your shark here and the yolk. And as the sharks get bigger, you can see here's one embryo here, really big. It's really close to being hatched and then released through live birth. And that's a picture of the reproductive tract inside of your dogfish, which you guys will see if you have a female. And so this has a name I like, called aplacental viviparity. So viviparous, or viviparity, means to live birth or placental birth. So this is aplacental viviparity because you get live birth, but there's no attachment to mom, right? Mom's blood supply. The baby's not a parasite. Now, some sharks do oophagy, which this is a really cool practice too. Again, another evolutionary marvel. So oophagy, oo means egg, phagy means to eat. So they eat eggs. And so once mom pushes the embryos into the uterus and they start developing, often they hatch inside of mom and they're swimming around in her uterus. Mom will then feed them unfertilized eggs. She starts ovulating eggs and the babies are already eating. They're already hunting. So they eat the eggs. And so this next picture shows you different sharks that practice oophagy that have been taken out of mom after they've hatched in the uterus, and their bellies are full of yolk, right? Because they've eaten unfertilized eggs. Pretty cool, right? This will produce a really big baby. Now, the shark that takes this to an extreme is called the sand tiger. It will produce a certain number of pups. They call them pups, the babies. And then the largest pup eats its brothers and sisters. So it starts hunting in utero. Each side of the reproductive tract will produce one of the biggest babies per body size of a shark. And so mom gives birth to almost a 3-foot baby. All right, so the baby comes out like ready to eat, right? Ready to hunt, in really good shape. And so I know that seems really cruel, but you're producing, it's like survival of the fittest, the biggest baby that you can produce that'll come out and not have to worry about maybe some predation issues that other sharks would have to worry about. The other thing I want to show you on this picture that I find just fascinating, there's all these, this is why I'm a vertebrate biologist, there are all these really weird aberrations within each of the different groups. This is a real picture. I know it looks like a swollen, like a stingray that swallowed something it shouldn't have eaten, right? It's like really big. This is a pretty rare ray. It's called a torpedo ray, and they can produce electricity. They can shock you. So if you get close to this thing, it can produce electrical current and then focus it at you and shock you. And so most predators don't bother it because you're going to get a nice shock when you try to put your mouth on it. So have you ever heard of electric eels? Electric eels do the same thing. There's an electric eel, the Amazonian electric eel, the giant Amazonian electric eel can kill a person, can stop your heart. So that's a pretty cool adaptation. And so this guy can do that also. The last type of shark are viviparous sharks. And can you believe it? There are sharks just like us that have placentas. Now the placenta is not nearly as derived as ours, but they do have attachment to mom. These are the most derived sharks. All right, and they have solved the problem of producing really robust babies the same way mammals did. Attach baby to mom and use mom's resources, right? Parasites. And so these are the most, what we would call advanced sharks. So bull sharks, hammerheads, blue sharks, blacktip reef sharks. These are the most derived group. They're in a group called carchariniforms. We'll see them when we get to the end. But the coolest thing about them is their uterus. If you look at the cells that line the uterus, they have really long microvilli and they produce a really nasty thick milk. And the babies feed on the epithelium. And they produce even a uterine milk that is of the same consistency as breast milk, for example, in mammals. Again, they produce huge babies because it's very lipid rich, very energy rich, and they produce very robust young during live birth. So, all right. So next time.